sir. All right, 2 Samuel, and not 2 Samuel, 1 Samuel. And we're going to be in 1 Samuel chapter 8. First Samuel chapter 8, as we are probably try to finish up 1 Samuel today. What we're finding in 1 Samuel is the answer to the problem of the book of Judges. In the book of Judges, it becomes apparent, especially at the end, that Israel needs a king. Judges ends with the idea that there was no king in Israel, and every man did that which was right in his own eyes. The last 5 chapters of Judges shows how the tribes of Israel were greatly divided against each other to such an extent that they had nearly wiped out the entire tribe of Benjamin, all but 200 men. And as you could probably figure out, if you just have 200 men, that means they're going to eventually all die out, right? And if, it's kind of like Eve was the first woman to eat the first man out of house and home, but where would we be without the women? Well, you could say we'd be in the Garden of Eden. Actually, we wouldn't. Adam would just be in the Garden of Eden, and it would be lonely and not worth it, probably. So I don't even know what I was saying. Oh, tribe of Benjamin was all but wiped out. 200 men left, and then the different tribe, they held kind of they all went up to the feast, and they said, well, we won't give you our women to be wives, but if you take them and make them your wives, well, then I guess you can have them. And so that's what happens. Everybody goes to the feast, and so the 200 men of Benjamin go out and steal themselves a bride, and so that's how we come to Saul. And it's interesting to think about. There would be no Saul had the tribe of Benjamin been wiped out. So that's kind of an interesting thought there. But so there was no king. Israel needs a king. 1st Samuel, 2nd Samuel show us how Israel gets the rightful king. It provides the answer. And they have one who comes in. The first king is going to, in essence, be a usurper, because after he's rejected as being king, he continues to stay on the throne. It's kind of a situation like we had with Biden and Trump. Trump didn't want to leave office. And, that's kind of what happened with Saul. Saul didn't want to leave office, and he didn't leave office. He ended up having to be killed in order to get off the throne. But let's look here, 1 Samuel chapter 8. This is where Israel makes it known that they want a king. So 1 Samuel chapter 8, notice here, beginning with verse number 1. It came to pass, when Samuel was old, that he made his sons judges over Israel. Now the name of the firstborn was Joel, and the name of the second, Abiah. They were judges in Beersheba. And his sons walked not in his ways, but turned aside after lucre, and took bribes, and perverted judgment. Then all the elders of Israel gathered themselves together, and came to Samuel unto Ramah, and said unto him, Behold, thou art old, and thy sons walk not in thy ways. Now make us a king to judge us. Now notice this phrase, like all the nations. This was really the big problem that they had. Israel has a desire to be like the nations. That was their problem. This was a heart problem. They had rejected God from being king. Now they want to be like everybody else. And so this is actually what's going to be made known to Samuel here. Notice here, verse 6. But the thing displeased Samuel when they said, Give us a king to judge us. And Samuel prayed unto the Lord, and the Lord said unto Samuel, Hearken unto the voice of the people and all that they say unto thee, for they have not rejected thee, but they have rejected me, that I should not reign over them. So when we read in the book of Judges, it says there was no king in Israel, and every man did that which was right in his own eyes. It's not that there wasn't a king of sorts. It is a statement that they have rejected God from being their king. It's not just that they didn't have an earthly monarch. They had rejected the Lord from being king. And this is exactly what the Lord's stating here to Samuel. They haven't rejected you, Samuel. They rejected me from being their king. So now let's keep going here. Verse 8, according to all the works which they have done since the day that I brought them up out of Egypt, even unto this day, wherewith they have forsaken me and served other gods, so do they also unto thee. Now therefore hearken unto their voice. Howbeit, yet protest solemnly unto them, and show them the manner of the king that shall reign over them. And Samuel told all the words of the Lord unto the people that asked of him a king. And he said, this will be the manner of the king that shall reign over you. He will take your sons and appoint them for himself, for his chariots, and to be his horsemen. And some shall run before his chariots. And he shall appoint him captains over thousands, and captains over 50s, and will set them to ear his ground, and to reap his harvest, and to make his instruments of war, and instruments of his chariots. And he will take your daughters to be confectionaries, and to be cooks, and to be bakers. And he will take your fields and your vineyards and your olive yards, even the best of them, and give them to his servants. And he will take the tenth of your seed and of your vineyards, and give to his officers and to his servants. And he will take your men servants and your maidservants and your goodliest young men and your asses, and put them to his work. He will take the tenth of your sheep, and ye shall be his servants. This sounds like the American government, doesn't it? He's going to take everything that belongs to you and that you hold dear, and he's going to use it for his own purpose. He's going to take it for himself. This is exactly what's going on. Verse 18, and ye shall cry out in that day because of your king, which ye shall have chosen you, and the Lord will not hear you in that day. Nevertheless, the people refused to obey the voice of Samuel, and they said, nay. Now watch this. But we will have a king over us, that we also may be like all the nations. Now notice this. And that our king may judge us and go before us. Now notice this next phrase. And fight our battles. And Samuel heard all the words of the people, and he rehearsed them in the ears of the Lord. And the Lord said to Samuel, hearken unto their voice, and make them a king. And Samuel said unto the men of Israel, go ye every man unto his city. So they want a king to fight their battles. Well, that's really interesting. Keep your place here. I want you to look with me at a couple other verses. Go with me back to the book of Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy chapter 1. I can get there. Okay, Deuteronomy chapter 1. Notice verse number 30. The Lord your God, which goeth before you, he shall what? Fight for you according to all that he did for you in Egypt before your eyes. Notice chapter 3 of Deuteronomy. Chapter 3, verse 21. And I commanded Joshua at that time, saying, thine eyes have seen all that the Lord your God hath done unto thee, unto these two kings. So shall the Lord do unto all the kingdoms whither thou passest. Ye shall not fear them, for the Lord your God, he shall what? Fight for you. Okay? Go to the book of Joshua. Joshua 23. One man, Joshua 23 verse 10, one man of you shall chase 1,000, for the Lord your God, he it is that fighteth for you, as he hath promised you. So now going back to 1 Samuel chapter 8, they want a king to fight for them, but what does God already say that he would do? He would fight for them. So they are deliberately rejecting God and his promises. And this is a bad place for the nation of Israel to be. So when Saul comes in, God allows and he selects Saul to be the first king, and it's for the purpose of judging them. They have rejected Samuel from being a judge over them. What was the purpose of the judges? The purpose of the judges was to deliver Israel from bondage. Well, now God's going to put a king in Israel over the nation who is going to do exactly that. He's going to bring them into bondage. Because he's going to take their sons, their daughters, he's going to make them his servants, and he's going to take portions of their land, he's going to take portions of their increase, and he's going to keep it all for himself, and he's going to make their land his own. That's exactly what Israel was facing in the time of the judges. Israel would apostatize, then God would allow the nations around them to take them into bondage, and then God would raise up a deliverer to judge Israel and to deliver them out of that bondage. Well, now they have rejected the judge that God has put over them, Samuel. They have rejected God from being the king, and so now their earthly king is going to take them into bondage. And so this is exactly where they're going, and it's not at all what they had intended. Now, notice here, I think this is a good note that the Schofield Bible has. This is Schofield Study Bible 3. I don't know if this is in the old Schofield, but it's a really good note here, just to kind of go on, because sometimes we get the mindset that Israel was rejecting a theocracy. I mean, they were at this time, but that God, in putting a king, they were no longer going to be under a theocracy. They were going to remain a theocracy. A theocracy doesn't mean that there's no earthly leader. And so this is a good note here. It says, the demand of Israel, as recorded in this chapter, did not mean the end of a theocratic kingdom. Although it implied a rejection of God, the people's demand was granted only in part. They were given a king, but certainly not like all the nations. God is always sovereign over the nations in providential control. But in this instance, he reserved for himself the right to choose the king by direct control. And the king was made personally responsible to God for his actions, thus clearly indicating an unbroken continuance of the Lord's particular sovereignty over the nation. The theocratic kingdom established at Sinai over the nation of Israel, through which God purposed to bless all nations, was a rule of God administered mediatorially, that is, through divinely chosen persons who spoke and acted for God in governing functions, and who were directly responsible to God for what they did. These mediatorial rulers could be great leaders like Moses and Joshua. They could be military leaders, which is who the judges were, or even kings. But God is always the real sovereign down to the end of the kingdom and history. Now, when it comes to Saul, this is one of the issues. Well, who chose Saul? Did the people choose Saul, or did God choose Saul? And the answer is yes. And I want you to look at something. Go with me to Hosea. It's after the book of Daniel. Hosea chapter 13. Hosea 13, I want you to notice down to verse number 9. This is actually a reference back to what's going on in our chapter. Hosea 13, verse 9. O Israel, thou hast destroyed thyself, but in me is thine help. I will be thy king. Where is any other that may save thee in all thy cities? And thy judges, of whom thou saidest, give me a king and princes. I gave thee a king in mine anger, and took him away in my wrath. So we see God is the one who chose Saul. And in a sense, he kind of let Israel think that they were making the choice. But God's the one who's in control. And just as God put Saul in to chasten the people, he's going to remove Saul toward the end here. So let's look here in our notes, down there under Saul. So the 1st and 2nd Samuel, the account revolves around three key figures. It was Samuel, which we looked at a couple weeks ago, and then this week we'll look at Saul and David. And just briefly, I don't intend to go through every single detail. These are stories, accounts that we're familiar with. Probably most of us have grown up with these stories, so we're familiar with them. But just to highlight a few things here, and just to kind of see the narrative and how the general flow is going. In chapters 8 to 15, they detail the life and ministry of Saul, who is the first king of Israel. Saul, is a theocratic ruler in cooperation with the priests and the prophets. That's what he was supposed to do. And though he was a monarch, he's supposed to rule according to the law of God, and he's supposed to work, and we'll see this again, but we mentioned a couple weeks ago, he's supposed to rule according to the book of the manner of the kingdom, which is basically the constitution for the nation of Israel. Something that Samuel writes before the people in chapter 10, as well as the leadership of the prophets. However, this did not come to pass until David ascended to the throne after the death of Saul. So Saul, initially, he begins his reign fairly well for about a year. He does a pretty good job for about a year, and then after that, it's a slow, steady decline for Saul, and eventually it leads to his demise. But he's really a striking figure. He's a big guy. He is a guy that you'd look at him and think, now this guy is going to go places in life. And that's how he starts out in his kingship. He's a likable guy. He has a great personality. He's meek. He's not overbearing on people. And he's a good-looking guy. The Bible says he's head and shoulders above the rest of the people. He's tall, dark, and handsome. Now David, he's going to be the opposite of that. Saul's the guy you would look at and say, that guy is going places. David you would look at, and just like his dad did, we better keep him out of the public eye. He can just kind of go and stay with the sheep because nobody likes the shepherds anyway. But what God does is he flips this. Saul is the one that God is going to reject, and David is the one who's going to be after his own heart, and that's what God's looking for. God's not worried about as much about our talents and abilities and our looks and our intelligence as much as he is about the condition of our heart. Do we actually seek after God? Because those are the people that he's going to use. And you can see it even with children. And we see this. You see kids sometimes, and they're growing up, and it's like, man, that person has so much potential. They're so smart. They're so strong. They can do all this stuff. And think, man, they're going places. And then they make shipwreck on their faith. But then you have the other people. It's like, I'm not sure about that guy. I'm not sure about that girl. They're trouble. You got to keep an eye on them. You got to keep them under an iron fist because they're just constantly out of line. And they're not going to amount to much. And those are the people that God uses. And it's crazy how that works. But we see that here with Saul and David. Now, Saul's career is basically divided into 3 stages. So first we see his early promise. Let's go to chapter 9 and notice here, and we're just going to skip down through some of these verses. Verse 2, talking about Kish's son. And he had a son whose name was Saul, a choice young man and a goodly. Now notice this. And there was not among the children of Israel a goodlier person than he. And this means that of all the children of Israel, everybody knew who Saul was. And he's the likable guy. And he's the choice guy for the job. If we're going to choose a king, we want Saul to do it. And there just isn't a better choice. That's what it's saying. And then notice, from his shoulders and upward, he was higher than any of the people. So he's a tall guy. He's a big guy. Notice down to verse 21. And Saul answered and said, Am not I a Benjamite? So Samuel's coming to anoint him to be king. Am not I a Benjamite? Of the smallest of the tribes of Israel, and my family the least of all the families of the tribe of Benjamin? Wherefore then speakest thou so to me? So we notice here, not only was he the choice, he was a likable guy everybody liked, but he's also humble. Who am I? You're coming to anoint me king, but I'm from one of the smallest tribes in Israel, and my family's not that well known. And why would you even come to me about this? So he has some humility. Now, that's a good quality. Notice in chapter 10. Chapter 10, verse 9. This is after he's anointed king, to be king. And it was so that when, chapter 10, verse 9, and it was so that when he had turned his back to go from Samuel, God gave him another heart. And all those signs came to pass that day. And when they came thither to the hill, behold, a company of prophets met him, and the Spirit of God came upon him, and he prophesied among them. And it came to pass, when all that knew him before time saw that, behold, he prophesied among the prophets. Then the people said one to another, What is this that is come unto the son of Kish? Is Saul also among the prophets? This is a transformation of the man. I don't know that this is so much a conversion experience. We'll talk about this in a moment. In the Old Testament, the fact that somebody had the Holy Spirit come upon them doesn't necessarily mean salvation in the Old Testament. But this is, in fact, that God has enabled him. He has transformed him into what he needs him to be the king of Israel. So, he has everything going for him up to this point. And notice this, down a little bit farther, verse 21. So the people have come to gather Saul. They made a feast for him and a celebration. Verse 21. When he had caused the tribe of Benjamin to come near by their families, the family of Matri was taken, and was taken, and Saul, the son of Kish, was taken. And when they sought him, notice this, he could not be found. Therefore they inquired of the Lord further, if the man should not come thither. And the Lord answered, Behold, he hath hid himself among the stuff. He's hiding. So he's kind of shy. He's not big crowd type of person. So, and he has, everything is going for him up to this point. He has striking physique. He's shy. He's generous. He has great potential. But despite all of his early promise, he has some serious character flaws. We find with Saul that he's dishonest. He lacks integrity. He could not admit to his own flaws. So even though he displays some humility and some shyness, he still has a problem with pride. And these are the things that ultimately lead to his disqualification. So we find his early promise, then we see his decline in chapters 13 through 27. Notice chapter 13 here. Chapter 13 and verse 1. And Saul reigned 1 year. I think it's interesting. Some of the new Bible versions, they actually translate this, Saul was 1 year old when he began to reign. Now that's pretty impressive. But Saul reigned 1 year. And when he had reigned 2 years over Israel. So we find here now, he's at the end of his second year. So he's been at this, started out pretty good, but now dropped down to verse number 8. And he tarried 7 days according to the set time that Samuel had appointed. But Samuel came not to Gilgal. And the people were scattered from him. And Saul said, Bring hither a burnt offering to me, and peace offerings. And he offered the burnt offering. And it came to pass that as soon as he had made an end of offering the burnt offering, behold, Samuel came, and Saul went out to meet him, that he might salute him. Verse 11, And Samuel said, What hast thou done? And Saul said, Because I saw that the people were scattered from me, and that thou camest not within the days appointed, and that the Philistines gathered themselves together at Michmash. Therefore said I, The Philistines will come down now upon me to Gilgal, and I have not made supplication to the Lord. I forced myself, therefore, and offered a burnt offering. So I really didn't want to do this, but I made myself do it. I did the burnt offering. Now, what's the problem here? He's treading upon the ground that belongs to the priests and prophets. This isn't something that he's supposed to do as a king, but he does it anyway. So this is a big no-no. This starts the bad part of Saul's ministry. Go to chapter 15. And this is, we're familiar with this account here with King Agag. Verse 1, Samuel also said unto Saul, The Lord sent me to anoint thee to be king over his people, over Israel. Now therefore, hearken thou unto the voice of the words of the Lord. It's almost like he's sitting down with a child. Now listen. And not just listen. Listen to the words that are coming out of my mouth. This is kind of how he's treating Saul. Look, I anointed you king. Now would you listen this time and do exactly what you're supposed to do? Verse 2, Thus saith the Lord of hosts, I remember that which Amalek did to Israel, how he laid wait for him in the way when he came up from Egypt. Now go and smite Amalek, and utterly destroy all that they have, and spare them not, but slay. Now, and he's getting very specific. And you can't miss the point here. but slay both men and women, infant and suckling, ox and sheep, camel and ass. Okay, so very clear command. Go to war with them, smite them, kill everything. Just wipe it out. Get rid of all of it. I mean, it's very clear what the command is. Okay? Now, is that what Saul does? Notice what he does. Saul gathered the people, verse 4, together, numbered them in Telaim, 200,000 footmen, 10,000 men of Judah, and Saul came to a city of Amalek and laid wait in the valley. And Saul said unto the Kenites, Go, depart, get you down from among the Amalekites, lest I destroy you with them. For ye showed kindness to all the children of Israel. When they came up out of Egypt, so the Kenites departed from among the Amalekites, and Saul smote the Amalekites from Havilah until thou comest to Shur, that is over against Egypt. And he took Agag, the king of the Amalekites, alive, and utterly destroyed all the people with the edge of the sword. But Saul and the people spared Agag, and the best of the sheep, and of the oxen, and of the fatlings, and of the lambs, and all that was good, and would not utterly destroy them. But everything that was vile and refuse, that they destroyed utterly. Well, and surely God didn't mean what he said. I mean, he surely meant that I need to keep at least the good stuff that we could sacrifice to the Lord. But what did God say to do? Kill all of them. He didn't say kill everything that was terrible and keep the good stuff. He said, just get rid of all of it. Verse 10, then came the word of the Lord unto Samuel, saying, It repenteth me. It means it grieves me that I have set up Saul to be king. For he has turned back from following me, and hath not performed my commandments. And it grieved Samuel, and he cried unto the Lord all night. And when Samuel rose early to meet Saul in the morning, it was told Samuel, saying, Saul came to Carmel, and behold, he set him up a place, and is gone about, and passed on, and gone down to Gilgal. And Samuel came to Saul, and Saul said unto him, Blessed be thou of the Lord. I have performed the commandment of the Lord. Now, is that the case? What's he doing now? First, he's disobedient to the Lord. Now he's lying to Samuel. Well, I did what God said. Well, I technically did what God said. You know, I killed the Amalekites. I just didn't kill them all. It's kind of how we reason sometimes, isn't it? Well, I technically did the right thing, but, okay. Notice what he says, verse 14, Samuel said, What meaneth then this bleating of the sheep in mine ear, and the lowing of the oxen which I hear? And Saul said, I have brought them. Is that what he says? Now he's passing the buck, the woman that thou gavest to be with me. It says, they have brought them from the Amalekites. For the people spared the best of the sheep and of the oxen to sacrifice unto the Lord thy God, and the rest we utterly destroyed. Then Samuel said unto Saul, Stay, and I will tell thee what the Lord hath said to me this night. And he said unto him, Say on. And Samuel said, When thou wast little in thine own sight, when you were humble, when you were a little guy to yourself, wast thou not made head of the tribes of Israel? And the Lord anointed thee king over Israel? And the Lord sent thee on a journey and said, Go and utterly destroy the sinners, the Amalekites, and fight against them until they be consumed? Wherefore then didst thou not obey the voice of the Lord, but didst fly upon the spoil, and didst eat, and didst evil in the sight of the Lord? So now notice this. Notice what Samuel is implying here, what the Lord's implying. When you were little, I anointed you king, and I gave you this command. So what's he implying now? Now you've become big in your own eyes. Now you've gotten the big head. Now you've become proud and haughty. And now it's not going to go so well for you. You know, that's where disobedience always comes from. It always stems from pride. Always. Anytime we disobey the Lord, this is exactly what it means. I know better than God. And it's only one person's fault. our own. This is exactly what Saul's getting ready to learn, although he doesn't really take the lesson yet. Notice verse 20. And Saul said unto Samuel, Yea, I have obeyed the voice of the Lord. He just can't get it through his head. And have gone the way which the Lord hath sent me, and have brought Agag the king of Amalek, and have utterly destroyed the Amalekites. But the people took of the spoil, sheep and oxen, the chief of the things which should have been utterly destroyed, to sacrifice unto the Lord thy God in Gilgal. So they should have been, but it was the people. Yeah, Saul, but you're the king. Who's going to disobey the king? And Samuel said, Hath the Lord as great delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as in obeying the voice of the Lord? It's kind of like robbing from a bank to tithe. Does God want us to tithe? Sure, He wants us to tithe. But does He intend for us to disobey Him in order to do that? No, not at all. For rebellion, verse 23, is as the sin of witchcraft, and stubbornness is as iniquity and idolatry. And because, notice this, because thou hast rejected the word of the Lord, He hath also rejected thee from being king. Now, what should have happened right here? Saul should have stepped down, is what should have taken place at this point. Saul should have stepped down from being king because God had rejected him. But what does he do? He refuses. And for another almost 40 years, he continues to reign on the throne and usurp that place of authority that rightfully belongs to David. And Saul said unto Samuel, I have sinned, for I have transgressed the commandment of the Lord and thy words, because I feared the people and obeyed their voice. Now therefore I pray thee, pardon my sin, and turn again with me, that I may worship the Lord. And Samuel said unto Saul, I will not return with thee. For thou hast rejected the word of the Lord, and the Lord hath rejected thee from being king over Israel. And as Samuel turned about to go away, he laid hold upon the skirt of his mantle, and it rent. And Samuel said unto him, The Lord hath rent the kingdom of Israel from thee this day, and hath given it to a neighbor of thine that is better than thou. Wow. And also the strength of Israel will not lie nor repent, for he is not a man that he should repent. Then he said, I have sinned, yet honor me now, I pray thee, before the elders of my people and before Israel. And turn again with me, that I may worship the Lord thy God. So Samuel turned again after Saul, and Saul worshipped the Lord. Then said Samuel, Bring ye hither to me Agag. I love this part. And Agag came unto him delicately. This means he's coming without any fear. And Agag said, Surely the bitterness of death is past. Surely they've kind of gotten over this offense from so long ago. And so they must be wanting to talk terms of peace. Boy, is he going to be surprised. Samuel said, As thy sword hath made woman childless, so shall thy mother be childless among women. And Samuel hewed Agag in pieces before the Lord in Gilgal. Then Samuel went to Ramah, and Saul went to his house in Gibeah of Saul. And Samuel came no more to see Saul until the day of his death. Now, that's a really interesting statement, because Samuel dies quite a while before Saul, the day of Saul's death. But here it says that he comes no longer before him until the day of his death, talking about Saul's death. That's really interesting. So just keep that in mind. We'll see that in just a minute. And the Lord repented that he had made Saul king over Israel. So this is interesting because the fact that Saul spared King Agag somehow leads to an offspring. And we see this offspring later on, even though once Agag is killed and all the Amalekites are killed, apparently somebody got away because of Saul's disobedience. Because later in the book of Esther, we find a man who wants to eliminate the nation of Israel, and his name is Haman the Agagite. So he is somehow a descendant of this king Agag. Now, what else is really interesting, and we'll see this when we get to 2 Samuel, but in 2 Samuel chapter 16, there's a man who begins to throw rocks at David and his mighty men. and he begins to curse David. And one of his mighty men takes up his sword and asks David, should we kill him? And David says, no, let him be. It's really interesting because a descendant of that guy, who David rightfully could have killed, that man's descendant becomes is a man named Mordecai. So it's really interesting how the descendants, the predecessors of these two men, are met in these two books with Saul as a result of Saul and David's works. But what we see here is that proud Saul is being brought low. That's the point here. And then this leads to his final and complete failure. Let's go to chapter 28. Chapter 28. Verse 3. Now Samuel was dead, and all Israel had lamented him and buried him in Ramah, even in his own city. And Saul had put away those that had familiar spirits, and the wizards out of the land. And the Philistines gathered themselves together, and came and pitched in Shunem, and Saul gathered all Israel together, and they pitched in Gilboa. So now, Saul's been reigning for quite a while at this point. David had been anointed king right after Saul was rejected by God. And so David's the rightful king. I think this is interesting, kind of an interesting picture that we have here. David is the rightful king in exile. Saul is a usurper of the throne. Now, who is it that destroys Saul? It's the Philistines. But who else is on the side with the Philistines? David is. So David comes, and he is actually part of the army that destroys the usurper. I think it's really kind of an interesting parallel to what we see in the book of Revelation. You have a usurper who is reigning on the throne in Israel, but then Christ comes the enemy army to defeat him. I just think it's an interesting parallel. But notice here, chapter 28, verse 3, verse 4. The Philistines gathered themselves together and came and pitched in Shunem, and Saul gathered all Israel together, and they pitched in Gilboa. And when Saul saw the host of the Philistines, he was afraid, and his heart greatly trembled. And when Saul inquired of the Lord answered him not, neither by dreams, nor by Urim, talking about the priests, nor by prophets. Why is that? It's because God had completely rejected him from being king. Notice here, verse 7. Then said Saul unto his servants, seek me a woman that hath a familiar spirit. Now this is interesting because remember, it says right at the beginning, he had put them all out of the land. He got rid of them all. So it almost makes you wonder, did he know that they didn't really finish the job like they were supposed to? But he wants a woman with a familiar spirit, that I may go to her and inquire of her. And his servant said unto him, behold, there is a woman that hath a familiar spirit at Endor. And Saul disguised himself and put on other raiment, and he went, and 2 men with him, and they came to the woman by night, and he said, I pray thee, divine unto me by the familiar spirit, and bring me him up, whom I shall name unto thee. And the woman said unto him, behold, thou knowest what Saul hath done, how he hath cut off those that have familiar spirits, and the wizards out of the land. Wherefore then layest thou a snare for my life, to cause me to die? And she understands this. I'm not supposed to do this. Verse 10. And Saul sware to her by the Lord, saying, as the Lord liveth, there shall no punishment happen to thee for this thing. It's just so stupid. Is God for diviners and witches and necromancers? No. So why would you swear by the Lord that there's no harm going to come to you? That's like blessing somebody in a homosexual relationship. Oh, and God bless you. And that's just dumb. God's not going to bless that. God's certainly not going to help this situation. This is very ironic how this happens. Verse 11, then said the woman, whom shall I bring up unto thee? And he said, bring me up Samuel. Now watch this. And when the woman saw Samuel, she cried with a loud voice, and the woman spake to Saul, saying, why hast thou deceived me, for thou art Saul? Now, why does this scare the woman? Isn't this what she does? Well, this is the first time the actual person themselves has come up. When somebody's claiming to talk to the dead, who are they talking to? They're talking to demons. And that's what they're talking to. But in this case, it is actually Samuel that comes up. And this frightens her. Because she knew who Samuel was. And the fact that Samuel comes up, she knows who this guy is. That's right there with her. Now you remember back in chapter 16, verse 35, it says that Samuel came no more before Saul until the day of his death. So what does that mean right here? This is D-Day for Saul. The fact that Samuel has shown up means that Saul is going to die today. She cried with a loud voice, verse 12, and the woman spake, why hast thou deceived me, for thou art Saul? And the king said unto her, be not afraid, for what sawest thou? And the woman said unto Saul, I saw gods ascending out of the earth. And he said unto her, what form is he of? And she said, an old man cometh up, and he is covered with a mantle. And Saul perceived that it was Samuel. And he stooped with his face to the ground and bowed himself. Let's keep going here. Verse 15, and Samuel said to Saul, why hast thou disquieted me to bring me up? And Saul answered, I am sore distressed, for the Philistines make war against me, and God is departed from me, and answereth me no more, neither by prophets nor by dreams. Therefore have I called thee, that thou mayest make known unto me what I shall do. Then said Samuel, wherefore then dost thou ask of me, seeing the Lord is departed from thee, and is become thine enemy? And the Lord hath done to him as he spake by me. For the Lord hath rent the kingdom out of thine hand, and given it to thy neighbor, even to David, because thou obeyest not the voice of the Lord, nor executest his fierce wrath upon Amalek. Therefore hath the Lord done this thing unto thee this day. Moreover, the Lord will also deliver Israel with thee into the hand of the Philistines, and tomorrow shalt thou and thy sons be with me. The Lord also shall deliver the host of Israel into the hand of the Philistines. Then Saul fell straightway all along on the earth, and was sore afraid because of the words of Samuel. And there was no strength in him, for he had eaten no bread all the day, nor all the night. So now it comes to D-Day. Let's go to chapter 31. So this has been a really long night for Saul. Now he's going back, going into battle. Verse 1, now the Philistines fought against Israel, and the men of Israel fled from before the Philistines and fell down slain in Mount Gilboa. And the Philistines followed hard upon Saul and upon his sons, and the Philistines slew Jonathan and Abinadab and Malchishua, Saul's sons. And the battle went sore against Saul, and the archers hit him, and he was sore wounded of the archers. Then said Saul unto his armor-bearer, draw thy sword, and thrust me through therewith, lest these uncircumcised come and thrust me through and abuse me. And his armor-bearer would not, for he was sore afraid. Therefore Saul took a sword and fell upon it. And when his armor-bearer saw that Saul was dead, he fell likewise upon his sword and died with him. So Saul died, and his 3 sons, and his armor-bearer, and all his men that same day together. What a tragic end. One command. Like, I gave you one job, and you couldn't do it. Kill Amalek. Wipe them all out. And he didn't do that, so God took the kingdom from him. And this is how it ends. This is how Saul's life ends. He was rejected by God. Now, we have a parallel of this in the New Testament. Let's go to 1 Corinthians 9, and then we'll be done. But Saul, though he was sitting on the throne, had been rejected from being king over Israel. He was not the rightful king. He shouldn't have been there. And God wouldn't use him. God wouldn't speak to him. Notice here, Saul was rejected for his disobedience. Now, I want you to notice here in 1 Corinthians 9, verse 24. Know ye not that they which run in a race run all, but one receiveth the prize? So run that ye may obtain. And every man that striveth for the mastery is temperate in all things. It means he has self-control, control of his desires. Now they do it to obtain a corruptible crown, but we an incorruptible. I therefore so run, not as uncertainly. So fight I not as one that beateth the air. But I keep under my body. It means I subdue my body. I keep my passions, my desires under control. And bring it into subjection. Lest that by any means, when I have preached to others, I myself should be a castaway. Now, the word castaway is not referring to salvation there. It simply means to be disapproved or to be disqualified. That's exactly what happened to Saul. He was disqualified. He continued upon the throne disqualified because he would not obey the Lord's voice. And this is something that applies exactly to us. I mean, we should desire to want to be used by God. We should desire to want to be in His service in some form or another. But we become disqualified when we are disobedient and when we do not control our passions and lusts. And we see it, don't we? We've seen in our day people who have big names, people who have great churches, Lord's using mightily, and then they become disqualified. Why? Because they wouldn't obey the Lord. And it's certainly a warning. And Saul is certainly an example for us of somebody who disobeys and the consequences. So just something for us to think about as we get ready to depart here. Father, thank you for this time that you've given to us in your word. Thank you for the word of God, how it pierces and it discerns the thoughts and the intents of our heart. And Father, I pray that we would learn from the example of Saul. He's a perfect example of what not to do. He started out small, but then he grew proud and disobedient. And I pray that you'd help us to be on guard of that in our own life. And that we'd search ourselves, that we'd seek to obey you and to be faithful and to humble ourselves before you. In Jesus' name, amen.